Hello, everybody. 5x5s, if you're watching this live, because we do this live on Space Coast Live, we've been doing every shuttle mission from the start, even before they started launching. We did some construction photographs once, and then we've gone through all the missions, and we've got to this one, which is STS-51-L. And of course, this is going to be a quite emotional one because this was the Challenger disaster for those who are just catching up with the history of shuttle, which a lot of you are because a lot of you have got into spaceflight via SpaceX and Starship and things like that, and they may know what a shuttle is, but they don't probably appreciate the ins and outs of the two disasters that beset the space shuttle program during its 30-year career. So we're going to discuss this in depth. I want to do a little programming note. We don't ever expect super chats when we do Raptor sides and things like that and live streams. It's always extremely grateful for it when we see it, and we always get surprised by the amount of support we get. I want to make a point that we do not want to see any super chats in this stream. I think it'd be very inappropriate, and I think it's more appropriate that you use the Challenger Centre's donate link if you're so inclined to support what we're doing here on behalf of NSF to help the Challenger Centre, because there's many great work absolutely related to this disaster from the Challenger Centre, and we'll be discussing that a bit later as well via Sawyer, who we've got joining us. Hi, Sawyer.
Hello, Chris. This is gonna be a tough one, but I mean, it's a very important story to tell, and it's also important to tell the good that did come out of such a dark day as well.
Absolutely. And also joining us is Jack. Hi, Jack.
Hey everybody. Yeah, this is not going to be a fun one, but it's one that we have to do. You can't ignore it. We have to honor the memory of this crew and this vehicle. I always say whenever shuttle is brought up, I always say, I both love and hate the shuttle. I love it because of what it was in terms of an engineering marvel and how just bonkers of a rocket it was. But hopefully I'm a little bit louder there now. But it also, this mission is one of the reasons why I hate the shuttle, because of what happened to it. Arguably management, arguably other causes the vehicle was fun. I mean, anyways, this is not going to be a fun one. Let's talk about it.
I never thought about it in that way, by the way, Jack. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, not that we use scripts, because that is an important bit of context here. And it's also going to be relevant to where we are now with the lessons learned. There were many mistakes around this mission, many human mistakes, managerial mistakes, design mistakes, and it all convoluted into the loss of 7 astronauts and a space shuttle orbiter. So that is absolutely important context, and I completely support that statement. And I say that as a shuttle fan, and so as a shuttle fan as well, we'll be the first to tell you that you're a fan because you appreciate the challenges involved, not just because you're thinking this is great and so what, there was 2 disasters. Would never say that, never ever say that. And I don't think any real shuttle fan would ever say that as well. I have lots and lots and lots of photographs. Now, I'm going to start with some of the happier ones because this is before the mission started. We're going to go through what this mission was, sorry, if you'd be so inclined, where I will scroll through lots of these photographs. We're starting with the mission patch, and I think there's an obvious reference to what this mission was in this patch, wasn't there, Sawyer?
Yeah. So this mission had 3 main objectives. There was to deploy a TDRS tracking data relay satellite. There was a special payload to study Halley's Comet, which was coming around in 1986 when this mission was to launch. And you can actually see that in the top right there of the mission patch. And of course, as you pointed out, what this mission is most famous for, which is the first flight of the Teacher in Space program, with Krista McAuliffe being the first teacher to fly aboard the space shuttle. And you can see the apple next to Krista McAuliffe's name on the patch, in the tradition of giving an apple to the teacher.
Absolutely. Right, let's go through these photographs. This is lots of photographs before the mission. This was obviously photographed more than a lot of the previous missions we've been covering. I have about 180 photographs, and I could have done more. There are so many of them, and it's understandable because this was a big deal for NASA as well. The space shuttle program was losing a lot of its context as far as public interest, as the Apollo missions did. Remember, that's why the Apollos lost a lot of public interest. And this was a great way of reigniting the interest in the space shuttle program by having this first time a teacher in space and all the outreach that could bring. This is before social media, remember everyone. This is before the days of X and Facebook and what have you. This was on your TV, in your newspapers, and that was priceless because that was a very narrow focused point of attention for public to get their information. So it was really out there. So I'm going to go through a lot of these photographs. They're not in order, but they're all pre-mission. So we're going to go through these and just show the crew in Happy Days. Obviously, this was relevant to the disaster. It was extremely cold in Florida in January at that time, and that plays into what the investigation found was one of the biggest critical decision points that was an error and caused the problems, which we'll go into later because I want to deal with that with the investigation part of this show.
Yeah, Chris, if I may, just really quickly, like, as a final little bit of like starting word here, like we don't intend for this, I don't think, to be, the end all beat all, documentary on what happened here. We're going through these pictures that you have culled from L2, and we're going to talk about the mission as part of Shuttle Sunday. Like, there's so many other good resources out there. I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, when you say you have these pictures and you could have done more, you're pulling them from L2 just in case like people are watching. This is their first Shuttle Sunday. They don't know what we're talking about. These are coming from the NASAspaceflight.com L2 forums, and we're just going to go through them and talk about the mission and honor the crew.
Indeed, yeah, and a lot of these photographs are public, by the way. We basically have a massive collection where a lot of them are as well. So we're just making sure that we have as much as we have possible archived, because that is important. I remember during the last shuttle missions that because the space shuttle program was retiring and the focus was on Constellation, NASA.gov actually deleted a lot of photographs. Literally happened. They deleted a lot of photographs because they wanted the focus to be on the future. And I thought that, we all thought at the time, was a big mistake. So we're now very much in an archive mode that anything we can get, we'll hold on to, public or not. These are crew training photographs. I'm going to go back one, Sawyer, because there's a person in this photograph who did not fly on this mission but was a backup astronaut, and that story will get told a lot more as we go through this show. Barbara Morgan.
Exactly, yes. As part of the Teacher in Space program, of course, they had the main selection, which was Krista McAuliffe, and the backup for Krista was, as you mentioned there, Barbara Morgan, also a teacher. You can see her training along with them. And a little bit of a spoiler of things to come, she ended up becoming a professional astronaut and flying later on in the future. But that was her assisting, going through the exact same training that Krista went through.
I think it was STS-118, if memory serves. I could be wrong.
Yes, it was.
Again, these are actual training photographs. These are not from when they were on board. Obviously in the classroom there, ironically.
Really,
Sorry, Jack.
it's just seeing all of these photos, like it. This isn't easy. This really
Nope.
humanizes the people that were involved here, and oh man,
It won't get any easier, Jack. I'll warn you. So we're going to go through. This is actually a past. Remember, people may be rightly confused, thinking they actually flew a shuttle mission just to fly a teacher in space. No, of course not. This was a payload mission as well. I don't know if you want to go through some of the main payloads with this patch on screen right now, Sawyer.
Sure. I mean, one of the main things that they were planning on doing, as I pointed out, was the fact that Halley's Comet, which only comes around every 80-something years, happened to be passing Earth at that point. And so NASA wanted to capitalize on that, and in cooperation with, as you see there, NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, created the Spartan Halley payload. This was the second one that was to be flown. There was one that had previously flown, and the goal was to measure the UV spectrum of the comet as it approached the point of its orbit where it would be closest to the sun. So that would be deployed from the payload bay and then retrieved later on in the mission, and basically spend about 40 hours free flying around the orbiter.
Very good. And more photographs of crew training. Again, a lot of these are great photographs, just capturing the optimism of the mission that was coming up. And Barbara, there's a video we'll be showing. It's not a great video to watch. It's sad, but it's important to recognize that Barbara Morgan witnessed this firsthand and still had the personal mentality to continue being an astronaut, and then, as Jack referenced, flew later. And we made a big deal at the time. This is way before the YouTube site. This is back when we were just a website. We made a massive deal out of Barbara Morgan flying because that was proper bravery. And the shuttle was still high risk. It was always high risk. And she still flew. So major props to Barbara Morgan. I would love her on a show in the future if she's willing to do it. We'll try. There's a patch again. There's Challenger on the pad. There's actually very few left showing Challenger on the pad head of this mission. I think it's probably understandable that they don't want that out there too much. But again, the cold conditions came into play. This was when they rolled it out, knowing it's going to be cold. There was 2 scrubs, wasn't there, Sawyer?
There's multiple scrubs over a course of bunch of days, including weather and vehicles. So yeah, it took a while to finally get it off the pad. And speaking of the pad, by the way, this was from Launch Complex 39B, not 39A, and in fact was supposed to be the first shuttle launch, and was the first shuttle launch from Pad B.
First one, yeah. More crew photographs, again, recognizing the rest of the crew here as well, because we'll talk about them in depth longer, but yeah, all these 7 crew members deserve the same amount of attention.
Yeah, which, by the way, for those who don't know who the crew are, might as well go through who they were if you can go back just a second, Chris.
Good idea, sir.
Yeah, so on the left there, of course, is the first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe. Then next to her, you have Greg Jarvis, who was a payload specialist with Hughes Space and Communications. Then you have Judy Resnick. Then you have Francis Dick Scobie, who is the commander. Then you have Ron McNair. Then you have pilot Mike Smith. And on the far right there is Ellison Onizuka.
Really quickly, I just want to comment. This mission gets a lot of press for the first teacher in space, but this is also part of Hughes and other companies getting to fly basically their employees on the mission with their payload. So it wasn't just about a teacher in space and the shuttle opening up to that sort of thing. It was also about opening up the shuttle to private individuals, such as company employees that had a payload flying, or reporters, artists. Like, there was a point where I think Walter Cronkite was trying like really hard to fly on the shuttle, and then this mission happened, and that dream kind of went away. But that I just wanted to point that out because it's just like the mission involved Halley's Comet. It also involved. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. The second guy from the left, Sawyer. What was his name?
Wait, who are we talking about? You talking about Greg Jarvis?
Greg Jarvis. Thank you so much. So yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to point that out. There's multiple things about this mission besides the teacher in space thing. Like, there's the Halley's Comet science. There's the Hughes employee flying on it. It would have been a spectacular mission. It would have been a really cool one.
Yeah, let's go through some more photographs because I have got a lot of these happier photographs where they're all in training. Again, they went through the full extensive training. This wasn't just some like put together last minute mission where they decided to fly a teacher. Krista went through the same process as the rest of the astronauts on this one, including all the training for this, because the training is the big deal here. Teacher in Space Project, that's a rare sight of one of the logos they would use on TV to promote this, because that was the thing that they could promote to the public more than, say, the payloads.
If you ever look at my patch wall behind me in some videos, I have this patch.
There we go.
The last time I was at Kennedy Space Center, I believe you can get one. Yeah, it's a beautiful patch. It's a really tragic patch, but it's a beautiful patch for the dream that it signifies.
Yep, and I have one on my flight jacket from when I worked at the Challenger Centers.
There's Judy Resnick. There's Krista holding the shuttle. That's one of the iconic photographs that all the astronauts would take. They had a crew portrait where it was like the full crew, and then their individual ones. Again, more training photographs. These are from the simulators at JSC. That's a lovely photograph. That I've used many times in X-Posts when we've done anniversaries just for Krista, because it's a happy photograph, and I think if you can do it, use a happy photograph in a tragic anniversary because that's how we should remember them.
Yeah, I mean, as tragic as this was, they all were doing something that they loved. So, I agree, Chris. I couldn't agree more. Don't use this stupid, don't use the image of the explosion for the love of God.
No, when we're doing the thumbnail for this, it was not a hard decision. Don't
Right.
use the explosion, use the crew photograph.
It really bothers me. It bothers me and I wasn't even alive. I didn't even experience it as a kid in a classroom like so many did. But I just don't want I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that.
It's
Sorry.
not the shock value of the shock is not of any value to anyone with that.
That's one of the simulators at JSC, which they use. There's several of them, obviously, for simulations and also for crew escape. Would you believe? I think I've got. Here we go. This is kind of poignant because they did do training for crew escape. Now, people hear a reference to RTLS in a video clip later on in this show. RTLS was not where you had escape options all the way from launch onwards. This was more a case of RTLS where if they managed, and it was a tough deal to do it, managed to get the orbiter coming back at least towards Kennedy Space Center, towards Florida, there was a potential opportunity to bail out over the SRB recovery ships where they'd be picked out of the ocean. That was pretty much it for RTLS. There was very little chance of getting back to the actual SLF, Shuttle Landing Facility.
Yeah.
So this was one opportunity.
I have to bring it up every time. There's a famous quote from John Glenn that a successful RTLS would require continuous acts of God interspersed with miracles, or something along those lines. I might be butchering the quote, but John Young ever verbose, and even to get the shuttle turned around and pointed back at KSC would have been a Herculean effort, let alone it surviving impact with the water and everyone bailing out successfully. But that is something they train for, because you have to train for everything.
And also worth noting that you couldn't even start that process until you got rid of the solid rocket boosters.
Right.
Yeah, and the structural loads during a turn were potentially going to snap the wings off. So that's what I was told. So there was lots of challenges involved with RTLS. It was not they've always got that option. It was really kind of like last gasp trying to get them back. And you will hear the reference to that because that was the assumption. If they had a vehicle issue during first stage ascent, which where the boosters are still on the vehicle, that was RTLS automatically. There was no other like, oh, can we do a boat to orbit? No, it was RTLS. Fighter jet T-38, I would have assumed training.
Looks like it. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm gonna be sad when those go away. Everyone's
right.
smiling.
So this photograph here, this is where the previous launch where Krista and Barbara had gone to witness it just to see what it was like. And there's a lovely photograph where the rail has been having the photograph taken. There we go. I do like that. That's a happy photograph again. They got to witness a launch together, both primary and backup crew. You can look at the interest already. The people with cameras in their faces, ignoring the launch,
right?
Which is also baffling. But that's what photojournalists have to think about. They've got to think about what they're going there for, not what they want to witness themselves. Would you believe? But
the amount of press that Krista and the rest of the crew had to endure on this one because of the nature of the mission, it's truly wild. As someone who gets recognized every now and then, I could not imagine having to deal with that level of press.
Yeah. Again, these are just nice. Obviously, at that point, they don't know they're being photographed. I would assume. I know they'll know there's a camera in the room, but they're just deep into their training. It humanizes what they're doing in training because you can see they've got like a camaraderie going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, even speaking of humanizing things, I mean, Ronald McNair there flew in space once. He was the first one to take a saxophone into space and play that in orbit. So
right, which is like has echoes of Polaris Dawn. They were going to attempt to have him play in space and then sync that up with a performance. I forget what the artist's name was on the ground. Like that was the thing that they were going to try and do on Challenger. I don't think Polaris Dawn even called that out, but something that I don't know if there was a specific connection to them for doing that, for or a reason for doing that, or if they just also thought that would be a beautiful moment. But yeah, I mean, again, opening up space to more things other than test pilots and the occasional science mission, like opening it up to the public. Let's play some music. That would have been really cool.
Again, another nice photograph. I can't remember, Sawyer, if that was NASA administrator at the time. I did try and search through to try and find a reference to who that is, but it was
looked
still a
like
nice
Greg,
photograph.
but I
Oh, it could be Jarvis. Yeah, it looks so different in a suit. That'll
yeah.
be it. Yeah. Oh my word. There we go. And there's payload.
Neat.
Thanks to Google for not recognizing him in his suit. There we go. Spartan payload. And that is a nice photograph of A and B.
Wow. 2 shuttles.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Rare.
In fact, the second one, it looks like it's still rolling to the pad.
Oh yeah.
It does, Sawyer. Well spotted.
Yeah, not there quite yet. Almost.
That's an iconic shot. That shot has since been repeated several times, but the last time was STS-125 and STS-400. There's crew portrait time again with backup Barbara. I think they liked that and the individual portrait there because Barbara was the actual backup. So if Krista couldn't have flown, it would have been Barbara. Payload integration shot.
Beautiful.
Yep, that's the Tidris payload, by the way.
Yeah.
Look at that camera. 16 millimeter.
Oh, do you know what it is? Oh, there you go. 16 millimeter.
Looks like a 16 millimeter motion picture camera. Yeah. RFlex. I can't see. Yeah, I think it says 16 down there. Yeah, that's a very nice 16 mil camera. Neat.
And I mean, that was part of the training, especially for Krista, was working the cameras as well as being able to set up the shots to actually perform different experiments in space. The plan is that she would go into space, do these different science experiments, compare them to students on the ground, and they would be live broadcast into classrooms all around the country and probably around the world.
Right.
Right, we're going to play the actual video that everyone's seen. This is the public NASA TV feed of the launch and the disaster itself. It doesn't go too long afterwards. So this is the actual video you've all seen if you've followed this. If you've not followed this before, it might be the first time you've seen it. So that's going to be sad enough as it is, but it is the iconic NASA TV view. I want to show this one first because then I'll show some photographs and then I'll show the video from Mission Control. The reason why I want to show it in that order, it will be obvious when I get through it, so I'll ramble less and just show the video. So hopefully you'll get the sound as well. Let us know in chat if you get the sound correctly.
Yeah, and of course, warning.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Now control. Roger, roll, Challenger. Good, roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading down range. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up. One minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles. here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have no downlink. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Right. The reason why I played that longer than probably I needed to was as on the YouTube videos where people have shown it, the comment section is full of negative comments towards the NASA POA, the commentator, for sounding like he was a robot. There's two things. One, he's got his head down reading out what he's seen on his screen. They've got a screen in Mission Control Center. I actually know a few of them. They've got screens like the controllers, and they're reading out information they think is pertinent to the public. They won't read it all out. He was busy reading those readouts, and there's a delay between the readouts and getting it onto air and what's happening on screen. So that's why he was still reading out velocity and things like that. And then you could hear, I mean, you can hear his voice break slightly when the vehicle exploded, but that's where it kind of sunk in, because the shock value of this is hard to appreciate. We can feel emotional about it watching it back, but the shock value may have turned him into an autopilot.
Yeah, I mean, listening to so in preparation for this, I've been listening to a recent audiobook that just came out on Challenger, and it sort of goes into it like second by second. It's The Challenger, A True Story of Heroism and Disaster on the Edge of Space by Adam Higginbotham. Solid book. But from the accounts, it sounds like a lot of people maybe were so shocked they were sort of in denial, or they didn't understand what they were seeing because it was just so horrible. I mean, I do think it took a little bit of time for it to sort of sink in what had happened. But yeah, it just speaking as somebody who points cameras at rockets, sometimes with humans on them, and also speaking as someone who sometimes commentates streams of rockets, sometimes with people on them. I mean, we're not going to say anything that is anything other than ironclad if an anomaly happens. Like, don't expect us to do really much different than what you just heard. We're going to stick to the facts. We're going to stick to what we know. And in a developing situation like that, all you can do is provide the information that you have and try to keep it together.
Yeah, I think it would have been worse if it had been someone emotional,
Right.
crying, anything like that. I mean,
Right.
I think it helped the situation of just here's what we know, here's what we don't know. I know a lot of people now, with hindsight 2020, can criticize it, but in the moment, that's the perfect response.
Also, his voice was over the loudspeakers at KSC where the families were. There's videos out there. I'm not going to show the video. There's videos out there where the family, a cameraman turns, and the cameraman then, he talked about it afterwards. The cameraman turned his camera to the families in the stands at KSC, and you can imagine the sights. It was not pretty. He said afterwards, he said it was his natural instinct. He said it had to be documented. He actually came across okay, because before I saw that interview with the cameraman who did that, I was thinking, what on earth were you doing that? That's just not on.
I mean,
But,
on the
yeah,
one
go, Jack.
hand, I understand that mentality. And that's like an old, like, hardcore newsman, news reporter mentality, or like a documentarian who goes to an impoverished village and it's like, well, I can't do anything. I'm here to document. I can't physically interact. But I don't know. I wouldn't have done it. At least I hope I wouldn't have done it. But I don't know that I'm thankful that he did, but I understand why one would do that professionally from a let's document what has happened
Yeah.
perspective. This is, oh God.
Yeah, I have.
Mhm.
I was talking about the collection of public and not public photographs. We have a lot of people in L2 who had photographs at the time, and I mean, I know from shuttle engineering photographs, which is the main bulk of things. It's not things like this, where we have shuttle engineers who said, "I've got like a shoebox full of photographs from me working on the space shuttle, actual, printed out photographs. I forget the terminology, Jack. Like, literally normal photographs, and we've then found a way to scan them, to digitize them, and they've sent them to us, and we've then basically archived them forever because they're on internet now. So
Wow.
that's one of the proud things. This is a good example of such photographs which we've got hold of, and this is amazing, really, when you think about it. Amazing in a terrible way, but
Yeah, it looks
again,
like it was shot from a plane, which is in and of itself not trivial.
No, I think that was
Uh,
shot. It looked like from the earlier photos from a pier or something to the north of
okay.
the Cape.
Got it. Oh God, this is not an image a lot of people have probably seen.
Nope.
It's a completely different angle than all of the. I hate the. It's for lack of a better term, quote unquote, iconic shots of this horrible tragedy. This image is a rather unique one that a lot of people probably haven't seen. I'm sorry, everybody that's watching this. Like we have to
We have
talk
to do
about
it.
it. If
We
you
have
don't
to
talk
talk about
about
it.
it, you repeat your mistakes, and
If
so
we'd
we're
skipped
talking about it.
this mission, it'd have been disrespectful. So
Right.
we had to do it.
Right.
Thing that gets me, I don't know if it's just me or chat. I mean, it's interactive. If people are watching a recording of this, you might understand why I'm talking to chat. We do this live. Shuttle Sunday's live on Space Coast Live at 2 p.m. on a Sunday. Not every Sunday, but obviously this is what we're doing right now. We're doing it live as we're recording this. The thing that gets me is this. The photographs, we've got timestamps in them, and the date is stuck in my memory. 28th of January 1986, and just seeing that was like, ooh, I don't know why, if it's just me or not, but that was kind of like brings it more home to me more than you know what you're looking at here, but then you thinking, well, someone actually took that with their own hands and pressed the clicker,
Yep.
and it stamped it on
Yeah.
the negative. Oof.
And had to develop it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, there are more. Remembering, as Sawyer will mention, the SRBs continued on, and then there were RSO.
Yeah, RSO, as in the range safety officer, gave the command to destroy the boosters as they started spiraling. So that's why you see that iconic, again, terrible use of the word, but that sort of iconic fork that comes afterwards. Those are the solid rocket boosters.
Yeah. Amazingly, he kept on clicking. I mean, you can't even imagine what he'd been thinking, the person who took the photograph at the time.
Right.
There's an even more iconic, not often seen photograph to come, which is even worse. Now, I'm going to show you the video of this. This is from Houston, Mission Control Houston. There are, you know what the internet's like, folks. There's stories out there. There's stories about a tape of the crew talking after the breakup. That doesn't exist. That was fake. There was also talk about how NASA knew this was going to happen, and all these controllers were trained for it. They were trained in disaster. They trained the mission controllers in all contingencies, and they put them through sims where everything goes wrong on purpose to train them. And the fact that you'll see in this video the shock and disbelief on their faces, one, shows they did not expect this to happen, and two, all that training could not prepare them for a real life event where they lost a crew, because they knew they lost a crew. These people know the space shuttle orbiter in and out. They know there was no way of recovering them. So you'll see in the video, it'll debunk some things out there on the internet where it was all a conspiracy and they knew it was going to happen and they were all trained for it. No. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't need to talk about that. Gene Kranz was there. Gene Kranz was kind of like always there. People remember him from Apollo 13, obviously, and the Apollo missions, but he stuck around at Mission Control Center for many, many years afterwards, including the start of the Space Shuttle program. And we don't have any clue what was being said there, but I can only imagine he is giving them their wisdom about, the risks. And not that they'd need to be taught it, but someone as iconic as Gene Kranz coming over to your desk and just talking to you must have meant everything to them. There he is again.
Yeah, and of course, they all review the data. So immediately in the event of a contingency like this, the first thing that they do is lock the doors, cut off all communications outside of the mission control room, and then immediately start archiving any and all data that they have up to and past the point of the incident.
Yep.
I'm going to be. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
No, you go, Jack.
I mean, I know at some point we're going to start talking about the investigation, and I'm a little bit mindful of, especially as we look at these images here, people who might actually not know. You know, someone who's just getting into the space world and is a youngster, dare I say, someone that's come up on Falcon 9 or Starship even, and has never seen these before, but.
I know where you're going with this, Jack, and I think you're right. As you can tell, chat, we don't script these things. We plan them out, but we don't script them, and I don't think we should ever script something like this. I think it's always right to just talk about what you see. And speaking about what you can see, I think we can start delving a little bit into the causes now, Sawyer, because this photograph is one of them, which kind of like tells you something, I'm sure. Even people who may not be into shuttle or know about this, or maybe new to this, will know there's something wrong there. And that is the O-rings. Yeah, I'll let you talk about it, Sawyer.
That is absolutely an O-ring burn through that you're seeing there. So, in terms of the design of the Space Shuttle SRBs, obviously there are the different segments that were stacked. These were 4-segment boosters. And in between them, there were joints. They were mounted together, and they had O-rings to basically try and keep the joints together and prevent any gases from escaping. It was meant to be a design, one hooked into the other, and there would be 2 O-rings. The first one was meant to be the main one. The second one was meant to be redundant. Later on in the program, in 1985, they changed that so that both of them were primary, which removed redundancy. Basically, if there was any slippage between the 2 areas where they connected, the O-ring would help try and reseal everything. In this case, because we'll get into the details with the weather and everything, there was burn through of the first O-ring. It resealed itself a few seconds after launch, but then into flight, they proceeded to burn through the first O-ring and then through the second O-ring, and that's what you're seeing in there is after it burned through O-ring number 2, starting to weaken the connection there between the SRB and the external tank.
Yeah, there's a couple things here. The SRBs were made of multiple segments, as you said. Why? Because you can't cast solid propellant that sort of a monolithic structure. You have to do it in segments. So each SRB is made up of multiple segments. Some of the segments are joined together at the factory. Those are called factory joints. Some of the segments are joined together in the vehicle assembly building. Those are called field joints. If you've ever seen any of our streams that we've done of SRB segments arriving for SLS, which we have done, go back and look on the channel. I feel like we've done everything at one point or another. Those segments are they need to be joined together, and the field joints in particular are more, I guess, delicate than the factory joints. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, Sawyer, as you said, there was a loss of seal. It sealed itself again partway into flight, and then you might hear us on various launch streams talk about wind shear, and this accident, the shuttle just prior to that seal coming unsealed again, the stack got hit by, I think, the highest amount of shear that it had been hit to that point. I could be wrong. Either way, it was a lot of shear, meaning the shuttle is ascending, the wind direction it is ascending through is going one way, and then it hits a layer of air that is traveling a dramatically different direction. That is wind shear. So basically, these O-rings, they sealed, but the shuttle got hit by this wind shear and the whole entire stack flexed. And that flexing caused I mean, without that wind shear, it may have made its way to orbit, and this sort of accident may have happened on a different mission later on down the line when it was also very cold in the morning. But wind shear contributed to this accident a significant amount. Those are just a couple things I wanted to call out. Sorry, I'll let you continue.
I brought up this photograph because there's several things related to this. The calls we'll get into in the investigation part of this, but this is the visual things you've seen as it happened. This was literally expected to be, according to Roger Bosley and Alan McDonald, who were the Thiokol engineers who flagged this as something that could happen, which we'll get into later as well. This is where it was expected to happen. It was expected to blow up on the pad at SRB ignition. That was the theory of launching in these conditions with this issue. It was expected to blow up on the pad. And you can see here, it almost tried. You can see the puff of smoke where my cursor hand is, right next to it. That is basically the O-rings there going on the first one. And basically that was debris that plugged the hole. And when it hit the wind shear and flexed, that released the debris. And that's when the blow through started happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of engineers at Morton Thiokol, which was the name of the company that made the boosters at the time, who essentially tried to stop the launch this morning. They had seen this issue on previous missions. We've talked about it on previous Shuttle Sundays. And just another compounding factor of this tragedy is the fact that people like Robert Beaujolais and others tried desperately, put their careers on the line to stop this from happening because they knew that those rubber O-rings at cold temperatures would not seal properly. And I believe Robert Beaujolais specifically sort of was, like you said, Chris, was expecting it to go boom on the pad. And when it didn't, he breathed a sigh of relief. And then
We've dodged a bullet, he
What
said.
I was just about to say. Yep.
And then when it did actually blow up, he was sort of telling himself, again, I just read this book, so take my words with a grain of salt. Telling himself it was the SSMEs, it was the main engines, it wasn't us. At least it wasn't us. And then, lo and behold, it was in fact the SRBs.
It gets more grim, Sawyer. We'll go further into that in the investigation photographs. We're still in the launch photographs right now. It gets more grim because there's lots of photography, a lot of it used by the Rogers Commission, which was the investigation into the tragedy. Yep. I was going to say accident, tragedy.
What I will say, Chris, is these images are really hard to look at, but as you said, these images were useful in finding out what happened. A friend of mine, another West Coast photographer named Gene Blevins, happened to catch a shot of Columbia coming in for reentry over the Owens Valley in California with a piece of debris coming off. And I believe that was the first image that they had of that. And that image is horrible. I would hate to take something like that. But NASA reached out to him and requested that image and camera and memory card and lens so that they could use it as part of their investigation. And these images are grim, but at least they helped serve a purpose in finding out what happened.
Again, you'll see it in the video I'm going to play in a minute. But there's obvious facial expression that doesn't know that it need me to commentate on. More launch. This looks like any other launch photograph that we've covered on Shuttle Sunday or you'll see in the future. It looks like any other photograph.
It's a truly beautiful image. The lighting on the LOX ball, hydrogen, but it's just absolutely beautiful image. Also, the crane was still there, I'd like to note.
Florida Today took this photograph. We've been tracking it down for a long time, so we have another photograph, which was never used. But that was a photograph from people watching, probably not at that time understanding what had gone, because the way that the visuals and your mind and the reaction works, they may have just been still watching the launch for all they were concerned.
Yeah, that looks like that's down near the Cocoa Beach, Patrick, at that time, Air Force Base area along the beaches where plenty of people still gather to watch launches to this day. Just go out there and, let's see if we can see it. And to be able to see that is horrifying.
We acquired one of the originals. That's the original that was not used in the paper. That was a few seconds later.
Dear God.
Yeah.
You can see the conflagration still going.
And in color, yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh. 7 people. That's 7
Yep.
people.
This is again frames almost. You could put this into a GIF and show it, but I'm not gonna. That's the last photograph of the crew cabin that stayed intact.
Yeah. And it's worth noting a couple of things about that. I think that's what you were starting to intonate towards.
Yeah.
Um, First off, there is a transcript from inside that is publicly available, and you have them checking the airspeeds, reading 486 on mine, said Dick Scobie. Mike said, "Yep, that's what I've got too." Then you heard the Roger go at throttle up. The last recorded data words were pilot Mike Smith going, "Uh-oh."
Yeah.
And then that's where the data cuts off and we see this. However, that does not mean that the crew perished at that point. That is just when the data stopped, because it turns out that uh, in the official report of the cause of death, they could not definitively say what caused the crew to lose their lives. But they did say the force of that breakup was probably not enough, especially when they recovered 4 of the 7 uh, PAPs. So that's the personal egress air packs, which is basically an emergency air supply, not oxygen, but actual air supply, in the event that they needed to escape while they were on the ground, and they must be manually activated. Of the 4 that they recovered, 3 of them were activated. They did note that the non-activated one was identified as Commander Dick Scobie's. One of the ones that was activated was pilot Mike Smith's, and the other ones couldn't be linked to a specific crew member.
Yeah, I believe I forget whose it was, but they basically they would not have been able to activate it themselves. So the crew member seated behind them would have had to activate it for them, which I think was Ellison Onizuka, which is just heroism on top of heroism to, in that moment, use what little time and mental acuity that you have to attempt to save one of your fellow crew members, knowing damn well that there's no one that's going to save you. Um, and yeah, just the idea that I hesitate to even talk about it, but the idea of a 2.5 minute free fall,
Well,
and
the
then with
irony is, Jack, they
hitting
weren't
the
even in
ocean,
free fall. They were still ascending
they were still ascending,
for a
right? Well,
long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
but the amount of air used on those units was consistent, I think, with about 2.5 minutes. So yeah, that's just.
Yeah,
And
for reference,
there was other switches, I believe, thrown as well. So they were, some of them at least were fighting to the end.
the accident happened 48,000 feet up. The apogee of the crew capsule trajectory was about 65,000 feet. So that's
Mhm.
25 seconds that they continued to climb.
I'm going to show the video, which was from the control room. It's shorter, but I think it's important context from the people who are absolutely trained for this, by the way, fully trained for it, and their reactions. It kind of just shows how human emotions cannot be trained out of the system. You can't make them into robots. So it's important to show this. Bear with me.
Roger, go at throttle up. Roger, go at throttle up. Fido trajectory. Go ahead. Trajectory, Fido. Flight Fido, filters got disconnect sources. Here we go. Flight GC, we've had negative contact, lost downlink. Okay, all operators, watch your data carefully. Flight Fido, till we get stuff back, he's on his cue card for the board logs. Procedures, any help? Negative, flight, no data. Flight GC, negative downlink. Copy. Flight Fido, go ahead. RSO reports vehicle exploded. Copy. Fido, can we get any reports from recovery forces? Stand by.
You can tell I was getting into that emotionally because I completely forgot to stop the video at the end. But it was very important context because there are people who, as the internet works, I've mentioned before, will try and find, oh, yes, it was all a conspiracy, it was all they knew this was going to happen and they were prepared for it. They were not prepared for it because it was not expected to happen. We later find out in the investigation that we're going to move on to that there were some people who knew this was the potential to happen and tried to stop the launch. But rather than going through the commission's multiple hundreds of pages, a lot of that you can literally just read out for yourself if you're so inclined. I'm going to go on to this set of photographs now, which will be out of order, but it's important post-disaster photographs that I didn't set this site or channel up to be talking about disasters as some kind of thing we want to cover all the time, but it's just important to do it. So forgive the context of my explanations into showing stuff like this, but literally starting there with President Reagan, the president at the time, who did an amazing speech, which you can find on YouTube. It's freely out there on YouTube. It was very well written, and he presented it very well about the loss. I think it was going to be the State of the Union address that night, wasn't it, Sawyer?
Yes, it was.
And he
Yeah.
cancelled that for this. Yeah.
Yeah, and did the address from the Oval Office, and of course the famous quote, "We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, as they slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God."
Yep. Jack, missing man formation, is it?
Yep, that's a traditional thing to do to honor fallen comrades. I've seen it done a couple times. It's not particularly fun.
No. And of course, important for the investigation itself, they had to go and recover as much as they possibly could from the vehicle from the ocean. So a lot of these are recovery photographs. That looks like an aft skirt of an SRB.
It's definitely an SRB segment.
Yeah.
So I guess we want to talk about the investigation a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? Let's talk through that as I'm scrolling through these photographs, because a lot of these photographs will be debris recovery photographs. So yeah, fire away.
Sawyer, I'll let you take it, but I do just want to mention Bob Crippen's involvement with the investigation. Obviously, Bob Crippen flew on STS-1 along with John Young and a bunch of other missions as well. Cripp is kind of a legend, and I think he treated the vehicle and the crew with the utmost respect with this investigation. And yeah, I don't know, but I'll let you take it away, Sawyer.
Where do we even begin with this? As Chris mentions, you can see the recovery photos. It took a little over 3 months of exploring to recover as much debris and other remains as possible. That, I believe, is where the remains currently are, in a silo at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It is quite haunting to be there and be near there. It's, yeah. Again, you can see just distinctive parts of it. So, as mentioned, President Reagan started the Rogers Commission as a way to find out what happened. That included some of the highest industry experts, famous astronauts like Sally Ride and Neil Armstrong. As you mentioned, Bob Crippen also involved in that. Richard Feynman, who we'll talk about why he became very famous with this. And as they inspect the joints there, they spent months looking at data, reviewing data, talking to people, and of course, the big question was who gave the go for launch once we knew what happened with the O-rings. And that came down to the calls the night before, January 27th, as they saw temperatures were set to go below freezing. We're talking like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, -3 Celsius. And the people who helped design those SRB joints, Alan McDonald, Roger Beaujolais, discussed with the Morton Thiokol team and said, look, we've seen the coldest launch that they had seen up to that point was just over 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And they had seen significant burn through of the first O-ring and starting to burn through, but thankfully did not go all the way through the second O-ring.
I believe that was also on a mission that Onizuka flew, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But your point is, Sawyer, that they had seen this issue in cold temperatures, and this morning was way colder than the coldest previous shuttle launch, where they had seen like this extremely troubling data. And yeah, it
Yeah, and it's worth noting that there was SRB burn through on every single shuttle flight in 1985 with the exception of one. And that was the most flights in a single year was 1985 for the space shuttle. But they had this data reference and said, look, we don't think the cold is safe for this. There was literal icicles on the launch pad. That is the burn through point there, by the way. You could see in the SRB segment.
can see the black soot. Yeah.
Yeah, and they said, don't do it. Yeah, they're crazy to be able to see that. They said, don't do it. And they said no go on the phone call, to which then the exact wording is still up for question of whether they were told to go back and discuss it, or maybe you should reconsider your opinion, as they were the only no go at that point. So they asked for a few minutes off of the phone call. They muted themselves, they had their own discussion, and that's when they came back and reversed their decision for the first and only time in NASA history where they had a no-go and then decided to change their mind and say, you know what, let's go instead. And they proceeded onward. And of course, as you mentioned, Roger Beaujolais watching from his office. Alan McDonald was at the Kennedy Space Center for the launch as the representative on site and having to see the results.
Yeah, there is some debate as to how that meeting went. It certainly seems like normally a flight readiness review or that sort of review ahead of a launch, whether it was an FRR or just an emergency meeting or what have you. If a contractor comes to you, NASA, and says, "Hey NASA, we're no go." Normally, NASA would say, "Okay, let's figure this out. We're not going." It seems like this morning, NASA was like, "Hey, you're the only no go. Are you sure? Because we want to go." And the Thiokol engineers, went back and talked to each other, and one of them was told by other Thiokol management, hey, basically I forget his name. I think it was Bob Lund. I could be misremembering that. But basically it was told, hey, you're the head engineer and all your engineers are telling you not to go, but now it's time for you to take off your engineer hat and put on your management hat. And then he was like, oh gosh, I guess okay, we'll go for launch. And that was the sort of way the reversal went on the Thiokol end, per this, again, the book. I put a link in chat. That's disgusting.
It's completely accurate, by the way, Jack. Word for word.
Yep.
That is disgusting. Like, not only is it disgusting on a variety of levels, for a variety of reasons, but the idea of putting 7 human beings' lives on the line with the cheeky little cutesy phrase, "Take off your engineer hat and put on your like, oh, I just want to punch whoever that was right in the face. I'm rambling. I'll stop. But that, yeah, just utterly blood-boilingly infuriating. Just a perfect example of how bureaucracy can just utterly ruin a good thing.
Yeah,
These are the
Robert Lund, Joel Kilminster both originally said no and later changed their mind. They even had a weather briefing because they were concerned about the ice. In fact, one of their main concerns was that ice was going to fall off and damage the vehicle from the icicles on the launch pad. And when they had their weather discussion ahead of time, including NASA's SRV project manager, Lawrence Malloy, They all got together to discuss the weather, and O-rings never came up once.
Speaking of O-rings,
You could see the double O-ring
yeah,
joint there.
yeah. And Jack referenced we have covered since the SRB sections arriving by train from Utah for SLS. Only just about a week or so ago, they showed NASA Kennedy Space Underground operations showed them stacking the segments for Artemis 2, and that brought back memories.
Yeah.
Obviously, not the same situation as this and the same risk. They've done a lot of changes since, but it was the same process. They shipped them in segments from Utah and then assembled them at KSC and the VAB.
I mean, I think I might be channeling EJ for a moment here. Like, yeah, that was a flaw in the boosters that this could happen. That said, if you launch them in the conditions that you know they work, they're really good boosters. They're really good boosters.
Yeah.
But you have to not be stupid. I mean, I hate to put it I'm sorry to put it so glibly, but you just have to not be organizationally stupid.
Yeah, that's where we always talk about go fever. This is the ultimate go fever issue right here, with all of the delays they'd already had, the fact that there was national attention on this because it was the Teacher in Space program, and that the program needed a PR boost. Everything in their instinct told them, we need to go regardless of safety.
I don't know if it's fair, but there's many stories about how there was go fever also because the president was due to do a State of the Union address that night, and he wanted to include in his speech there was a teacher in space, and I don't know if that's fair or not, but it was certainly the timing of it can make people assume that would have been something of benefit, but I can't imagine them launching for that.
Whether or not that was a direct consideration, you have to acknowledge that these two things happened on the same day, and you have to acknowledge that part of the reason NASA broke established protocol and essentially pressured Thiokol. Like, Thiokol shouldn't have reversed their decision. Yes, NASA shouldn't have pressured Thiokol to reverse their decision. And you could see how sort of the managerial side of NASA and the administrative side of NASA and the PR people, you know, they want this thing to go because they want their PR win, and it's just gross.
Instead, the president had to hand out American flags, the folded American flags, to the relatives at this event, which was the memorial event.
Yep.
I believe I've got one more photograph to show. Sawyer, you mentioned about the silo, which I've always been disgusted about the remains of Challenger being in the silo. Luckily, they have recovered. They did uncover the silo and recovered some of the debris, and it's now on display here.
Yeah, the iconic piece that has the American flag on it, there it is on display at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex in a section of the Atlantis exhibit called Forever Remembered. And in addition to, you could see there the vehicle segment on the left from Challenger, on the right, the window segment of Columbia from STS-107. And most importantly, they also have pieces of personal artifacts related to each of the crew members, all 7 of them from Challenger and all 7 from Columbia. Some of their early flight suits, some of their Girl Scout badges, all these different model airplanes that they would make. It's a beautifully done piece of humanity to it.
Yeah, it's a tough exhibit, but it's a beautiful one, and I'm glad that it's there to honor these crew members.
I've been in that exact room where this photo was taken, sat there looking at these, and just cried.
Yep, don't blame me.
Openly admitting I've done that.
And that photograph's from Jax, our very own Jax, who's one of our team.
Nice.
Who's been to so many launches. It's incredible. He goes out. He's from the Netherlands, and he goes out. He's got all these photographs from tens of missions, and I was so grateful he took this one as well because that was very relevant to this show. I have a clip, a very short clip, because there's lots of clips of this, but there's a short clip that I want to play that is very poignant to how Professor Feynman, pretty much took NASA to the ringer over this. I'm going to play the clip for context, and we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards.
took the stuff that I got out of your seal and I put it in ice water. And I discovered that when you put some pressure on it for a while and then undo it, it maintains, it doesn't stretch back, it stays the same dimension. In other words, for a few seconds at least, and more seconds than that, there's no resilience in this particular material when it's at a temperature of 32 degrees. I believe that has some significance for our problem.
I believe that has some significance for our problem. That is a clever man using words to say things that people like me would use swear words for.
Yeah.
It was very powerful.
Also notable that Feynman was dying of cancer at this point and essentially used, what little time he had left to try to really get to the bottom of what happened here. And a part of that is, of course, the demonstration that we just saw with the O-ring material at cold temperatures not stretching back. Another part of that is the management failure that occurred and the culture failure that occurred at NASA. I believe it's Appendix F of the Rogers Commission report is Feynman's conclusions. And if you do nothing else in regard to this tragedy and the content that we're showing you here, or the report itself, which honestly is something everybody should read. Read Appendix F. Just read Appendix F.
It's available on the NASA website, the full Rogers Commission. And yeah, in fact, Richard Feynman basically flat out said, I have some really harsh criticisms that I want to put out there. And they were hesitant. And he said, look, either give me the chance to really tell you how I feel about this, or I'm taking my name off of the report. And so that is why his observations are there as Appendix F, where he basically said that, there's great engineering and software accomplishments that were done in the shuttle program, but there were so many things that were way more accident prone and dangerous than had ever been estimated.
I have both reports. There's no way we could go through them. It would take hours to go through them. But I remember when I was reading them, that was quite important. Something myself and Jack have talked about on previous streams, about how the design of the space shuttle from the concept was changed to the point that it increased the risks of problems. And this opening chapter introduction literally starts Space Shuttle design. The embryo shuttle program faced a number of evolutionary design challenges before it would become a system in being. Again, that's just clever wording to say, you're pandering to the US Air Force wanting cross range. You're pandering to this. You're using cross-country manufacturers to keep, political parties happy, where you actually have to have the SRBs in segments taken by a train from Utah and then assembled. Everything
Chris,
about this.
If I may, I think, and I swear I'm not even trying to do this. This is just where the conversation logically goes. This comes back to Starship, and what makes that so exciting is because Shuttle never, ever should have been declared operational. And if you go back and you look at our previous Shuttle Sundays, we even talk about that. I think it was STS-4? Or somewhere around there, maybe 7. Either way, this vehicle should have remained a research vehicle. They were trying to do so much new groundbreaking design with Shuttle, and then they had to back off of a lot of what they were trying to do, like you said, in the name of cross range, in the name of pandering to various constituencies and whatnot, and the design became sort of designed by committee. And you know what? It still worked. It's just, if only we could have actually gotten a Shuttle 2.0. If only they could have flown the shuttle, a dozen times, taken what they learned and made a Block 2 shuttle. Or just something where, okay, now we know what we didn't know when we built the shuttle. Let's build it right. Maybe let's do liquid side boosters. Maybe let's do a flyback external tank like we were originally going to, or any of the number of things that could have been done with an evolution to this program. But that's part of the reason we're excited for Starship, because if it lives up to the dream, hopefully it will actually do the things that Shuttle wanted to do, and hopefully Starship will be launching teachers, Starship will be launching artists, Starship will be launching regular people who just want to go experience space for a weekend, and that's the dream that was put on hold by this tragedy.
Well said. I have one more video to show. It is slightly out of sync with this show, but I think it was an important one for a human perspective of witnessing this. It's one of those rare ones, and it's Barbara Morgan watching her friends. So it's not great to watch. There is important context in this. When you see videos on YouTube, and some of you may search out after the show or have seen before, you're wondering why people's reactions aren't as obvious as maybe, you would have if you're watching the TV view of it. Watching on the ground, the actual launch trajectory of this meant a lot of it was obscured by the plume. So it wasn't completely obvious at the start. The references you need to hear in this clip, it's short, are that doesn't look right. And then Barbara Morgan agreeing it doesn't look right. And then you can hear, I hope you can hear it over my audio. You'll hear someone shouting RTLS, because that was the immediate go-to scenario, thinking that the explosion was not a full explosion or, as bad as it seemed, that the orbiter survived it and the orbiter was free. If the orbiter was free, that was probably the only hope they ever had, was trying to fly it back. Again, total impossibilities knowing what we know, but that was just the instinct reaction of people on the ground. So I'm going to play this clip. It's not fun. I'll warn you in advance. Yeah, so you probably understand why I was preparing you for that one, because that's not nice. But it is important, again, the context of all of this, that hopefully we won't be witnessing it again.
Yeah, they all thought that was SRB separation originally, so that's why you could hear everyone cheering and Barbara Morgan waving as you hear in the background the Roger go with throttle up. They thought that was SRB sep. It obviously was not the designed separation.
I know that was really, really hard to watch, but just to underscore what we mentioned at the start of the stream, Barbara Morgan did go on to fly in space on STS-118. I think she was a mission specialist. So there's no silver lining here. There's no good part of this, but the fact that she showed, that dedication to the program and that dedication to the dream, and eventually did fly, even after having witnessed what we just saw her witness, is remarkable. The human spirit is remarkable.
Yeah, she became an official astronaut in 1998 and got to fly on that first shuttle mission, STS-118, which I believe was 2007.
Now, Sawyer.
Yes.
Let's also talk about the families in a positive way, because you'd have forgiven them for trying to get away from all of this, but instead they were heavily involved in setting up the Challenger centers. And I'm going to show a photograph of our friend Sawyer here. Whoops,
Yeah.
let's zoom in.
I always
Let's
talk
talk
about
about the Challenger center, yeah.
Yeah, I always talk that I had a patch flown in space. It was not for me. It was for the Challenger centers. On the left there, that is June Scobie Rogers, the wife of Commander Dick Scobie, myself, and then President Dan Barstow with the Challenger centers. That patch that you see that he's holding there was flown aboard STS-127 Space Shuttle Endeavour and was presented to them because the Challenger Center is something very near and dear to my heart. So, I went there as a summer camper shortly after I was in a wheelchair. I was just too old. It was supposed to be up to 12 years old. I was 13 at the time. And John Huberts, who was running the center, said, "You know what? Come on in anyway." And I did. And I joked that I became the camper that never left because I fell in love with the Challenger centers. So basically, for those who don't know, Challenger Centers for Space Science Education, or the Challenger Learning Centers, they're located all across the U.S. and now internationally. As a way to help teach kids about science, technology, engineering, and math, there are simulators. They don't actually move, but there are two rooms, a mission control room and a spacecraft room. And there are stations that represent real-world jobs at actual mission control centers, at different tech companies, and they go through a simulated mission to either the moon, Mars, rendezvous with a comet,
That's
study
so
the
cool.
Earth, and they get to experience both sides. I mean, we're talking communications, we're talking
Have they
people that are
ever
acting as navigators. They get to use actual physical robotic arms.
have they ever launched a shuttle into space by accident, like that movie Space Camp?
Oh God.
That's really cool,
Oh.
though, Sawyer. And that's the link that we have in chat, right? That people can support.
Exactly, yes. I worked with the organization for over 12 years, flying over 1,000 simulated space missions, and it is the coolest thing. In addition, they also have other great science programs. I mean, I was there studying Mars and astrobiology, Lego robotics, all of that with the centers. They're absolutely brilliant. If you have one near you, I highly recommend checking it out. If you have any kids interested in space and can get them to fly a mission at a Challenger Center, I 1,000,000% recommend it. It can be life-changing. For me, I had basically no interest in space, but it just so happened the week that I was at camp was the week of the launch of STS-118 and Barbara Morgan, which was obviously a huge deal with the Challenger centers. And I was intrigued. What is this? Why is it so important? And that's when I began researching the space shuttle and fell in love with space. I would not be here today without the Challenger centers. In addition to that, I had the coolest thing happen last year. They put out newsletters of, past alumni and things like that. And I saw a photo of one of the kids who was on the Lego team that I was a part of at the Lower Hudson Valley Challenger Center in Rockland County, New York. It turns out he now worked on the Perseverance rover that's on Mars.
No
So
way.
one of the kids that I taught at the Challenger Center
Wow.
became an engineer that designed part of a Mars rover that is currently roving the surface of Mars. And that, again, the power of the Challenger Center. So there is some good that did come out of this, and it continues to produce good to this day and introduce more kids to science, technology, engineering, and math, and encourage them to continue on it. Because there's so many kids I see where they think it's so cool, but then as they get older, oh, that's nerd stuff. Oh, that's not cool anymore. Oh, and then they just drop it. This is a way to show everyone, look, this is cool. You get to actually try the job out in real life of being a mission controller, of being on a spacecraft, building a probe, working in a glove box. I can't say enough good things about it, and to see that it makes a difference, it just warms my heart every time.
Absolutely. I put the link in chat a whole bunch. I'm going to put it in a whole bunch more.
I will note that it is actually pinned as well. So if
Thank
you missed the spamming of it, which I completely support, by the way, it's been pinned since throughout the show as well, just to make sure people didn't do a super chat when they could have given something towards that, because that's more important. So spamming, absolutely, also pinned if you missed it. I will pin it if you're watching a recording of this. It will be pinned. One thing I want to say is, if you're watching a recording of this, in the comments section of the video, just post if you were around at that time, if you recall your memories of witnessing this, either be on TV or in the news, Uh, it's always fascinating. I know before we started the show, people were already doing that. So I think that is something that gravitates towards what people want to share. I know a lot of people may not have been born at that time, but again, maybe the first time you heard about it, or when you got into rockets and you thought, oh, well, I'm just going to do some research into rockets, and you got into this rabbit hole of going through the shuttle missions and seeing these tragedies of STS-51-L and STS-107. I'll give my experience for free. My experience was I was a very young first job paper boy on my little bicycle, taking papers around my local suburbs of York. And I'd got back to the paper shop. Now, think about the time zones here. It would have been about an hour after the launch. By the time I got back to the shop to hand my bag in after I delivered all the newspapers, and two men, I remember this distinctly. I can still see it in my mind's eye, which is amazing because my brain's going. So to still remember this distinctly is crazy. There were two big guys, because I was only a little boy, two big guys outside the shop, and they said, one said to the other, the space shuttle exploded. Now, I don't know why that hit me so hard, because I wasn't into rockets. I knew what a space shuttle was. I'd seen photographs in the paper, as most people would have been. I'd never really been a subject that totally interested me. I remember going home, and my mother had the downrange view on BBC News, which was shown on TV. And I just remember watching it, and I was thinking, I was interested, but I wasn't still totally into it. Then they replayed the launch, and that struck me, because it was a beautiful thing to see. It was really stunning. It was a blue sky. It was bright day. It was this amazing rocket that looked like a space plane launching. And I was just blown away by it. That view of the launch, it was just leaving the pad. It was that which really caught my attention. And the next day, this is before the internet, remember? The next day I went to the library and I got books on the space shuttle program. And that's where my interest started. And that's why I eventually ended up starting this site. So Challenger is the reason why you've got NSF.
I thank you for that, Chris. I don't even know that I can keep it together at this point, but I will try. We all experience adversity and horrible things in our lives, and you have to pick up and keep going. And even Reagan, in his speech after this tragedy, he could have boxed up the space program. We could have packed up our rockets and gone home, but no, we continue to push on into this last frontier. And there, in all likelihood, just statistically, will be more loss of life as we continue to expand into the solar system. And it's a frontier. We're pioneers, and it's not routine yet. And we all are hoping for a day where it is a routine thing, just like an airliner, and we don't think twice about it. When we're closer than we've ever been to that point, thank God, with Starship, but we're not there yet. But whether it's just something that you happen to witness, or whether it's something that you experienced firsthand, just keep fighting. The astronauts in the crew cabin, they fought all the way down. Barbara Morgan, she fought and continued to be an astronaut. You just got to keep fighting.
Sawyer, do you want to have any closing thoughts? Because I think this is probably a nice point to end it on before I mention what the next Shuttle Sunday will be, which will be a much happier one.
It's one of the darkest days in NASA's history, but it's so important that we continue to learn from this, never make the same mistake, and never forget it. As much as we talk about new space and all of the future of space exploration, as Jack said, it's inevitable statistically that there will be more loss of life, but please let it not be because of people who said, let's go, when people said no. Please don't let it be decisions that people had seen issues with on previous flights and said it's fine. Please let us learn from these mistakes so that it doesn't happen again.
Indeed. Absolutely. And this was a tough one to do. We said it'd be a tough one to do. That's why we delayed it for several weeks. We wanted to do it around the time of the anniversary, which made more sense, especially not on the anniversary date itself. That would have been too on the nose. But around this time, because this is a bad period for NASA with the Apollo 1, STS-151, my brain's going already, STS-51-L and STS-107. The next one will be STS-26. That is a return to flight Discovery. Discovery was involved with both return to flights, which is one of the reasons why it became the flagship. And that was 2.5 years later. So we're going to go fast forward in time for the next Shuttle Sunday, 2.5 years into the future, for September 29, 1988 for STS-26 with Discovery. And that's the return to flight mission. So that's the next Shuttle Sunday we'll do. Until then, thanks for joining us on this one. It will be recorded and put onto the channel for people who missed it early next week. Early in the coming week, I should say. But thanks, Jack, for being on. Thank you, Jack.
Of course.
Also, thank you to Sawyer. Thank you, Sawyer.
Thank you for having me. And again, appreciate everyone that's already donated to the Challenger Center so far.
Absolutely. And thanks for you all for joining us on this one. It's been rough, but we had to do it because to ignore it would have been disrespectful. Until the next time, thank you for joining us and goodbye.